Pleasant good evening to Dr. Ann Barratt.
Yes, good evening.
Good
Thank
evening. Welcome. This is Mikee K here. You are live on The Observer on Gayelle TV. I want to thank you so much for taking time out to link with us this evening. Just to let the viewers know, the public know that Dr. Ann Barratt is lecturer and head at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies at the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus. And let me tell you, she's a wonderful scholar and a great human being. Thank you so much for taking time out. So much, in the news yesterday, Dr. Barratt, and I don't want to get into the core of any investigation, but it has been happening time and time again where there's relationships where someone is basically, had enough, or we don't know what drives them to that point. Hopefully you can give us some clarity on that, where they take their life and the life of their loved ones. Based on our culture, one that we seem to just shut off as it's a horning culture, that's just the way it is. Have we matured enough to understand the consequences that we pay when we simply don't try to stop some of these things from taking place?
I don't think it's a matter of maturity. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm happy to join in this conversation. I don't think it's a matter of maturity because I think it is deeper rooted than that. I think it is a matter of norms and belief systems. And what do I mean by that? We have constructed relationships on the basis of ownership. And romance is rooted in ownership. What do I mean? We say this is my wife, my husband, my girlfriend, my partner, my boyfriend, whatever it may be. And we have a set of attendant expectations attached to those relationships that are rooted in ownership and obligation quite often, rather than trust and mutual understanding. Therefore, and those belief systems are reinforced in the stories we tell ourselves and the way that we construct fruitful relationships and how we should form them and what we should do. And honing or infidelity is often an inability to address those issues that constrain us. We feel trapped, therefore we cheat. That's why it's called cheating. So really and truly, it's not about maturity. It's about the belief systems we hold. And some of them are explicit, some of them are implicit. That says,
right,
when in a relationship, you own your partner and you're obligated to your partner because they own you. And then when you are disappointed, you react with violence.
Yeah, but Dr. Barratt, when you talk about the fact that so much of this is instilled, I mean, we are a product of our environment. And if you ask any young lady what kind of wedding day she would like to have, she would tell us, I want my husband to wear this, and I want my bridesmaid to wear this, and I want, this is the color coordination, this is the caterer, and it's all good and well preparing for that wedding day. But how many of us understand and instilled in us that we are preparing for a marriage, for a commitment? And there has to be some sort of science. And how many of us are willing to compromise on many of these things that we see from day one that's wrong? For example, the same thing you spoke about, the possessiveness, the fact that someone has the inability to take rejection, refusing to respect boundaries. I mean, it's all good and well for the wedding day, but do we understand as a society what we're getting into when we make this lifelong commitment?
Well, you're asking me a deeply gendered question. First of all, let me just say that the stories that we tell ourselves are not laden with negative intent or positive intent. It's just a story that is normative. So that's something we want to keep in mind. Secondly, a lot of people, when they're getting married, they get counseling from their religious groups or their friends or whoever they choose to go to. But all of these conflict resolution strategies, all of these understandings about our roles in relationships are deeply held beliefs. So I would suggest that unless we are willing to deal with the most uncomfortable, which is disrupt these deeply held beliefs around who's entitled to whose bodies, who should be given what and taken what, who compromises and who does not, until we are willing to do so, then the problem will perpetuate itself. So, in essence, we want the problem, the end result, to come to an end, but we still hold on to the fact that this is how one set of people are, and this is how the next set of people are, and forever they will be this way, when it is simply us agreeing that that's how it is. So I would say to you that people are prepared for the institution of marriage or the complexity of relationships. They are, but they are not prepared for when these things do not match their expectations, if you're with me.
Yeah, but how deep are your expectations that the point that you decide at that point that, listen, I am so hurt, I feel as though all my trust, everything is out the window, that I could simply just take the life of someone else and myself as well? How does it get to that point?
It's a very extreme response, but think about it. Things do not start in the immediate.
Right.
So let's say, now, of course, there are multiple reasons a person will take that decision, and so we cannot attribute any one reason. But what I will explain, how does someone get there? Someone might get there because, as they say, it might be the straw that broke the camel's back. Someone might get there because it is so confronting to their sense of self, I suggest, not everyone would agree with me, that they do not see an alternative. They see it is loss of hope, loss of reason, loss of options. Another reason sometimes is a matter of control. To go back to my first point, if you find that you have lost control, you will do whatever it is to take it back. Now, these may not apply to particular individuals, but usually it is because the situation has come to a point where in their lived experience, no alternatives are given, such as if one is extremely disappointed in a relationship and someone has breached your trust or they have hurt you, you can just leave. You can just say goodbye, deuces. This is a hurtful time in my life, I'm done. But sometimes that's not presented to you. You have been told, you have been made to understand, whether those messages are overt, covert, subliminal, that this person belongs to you, and therefore you have to either punish, you have to lay claim, you have to control the situation. So it's an extreme response. I agree with you, and it's something that we want to avoid. We want to give people the alternative. Hey, this is not the response. There are alternatives. You are not trapped.
I agree with you, because everyone would be, looking on and saying, wow, I mean, no matter how bad it was, I mean, no matter what took place, that is extreme.
Of course, it is extreme. But we want to change the behavior, which is very important. But we approach it now not from our understanding. So I might sit and say, I would never do something like that. I would never. But you have to then take the perspective of the other. So let's say someone is find themselves in a desperate situation, or they're not thinking clearly, or they have no one to give them advice, or they're ashamed, or they're hurt, or what the range of complex emotions. This can lead them to be extreme, because extreme circumstances lead to extreme behavior.
Right.
Of course, sometimes people have pathologies which will lead them to act, no impulse control, these kinds of things. That's another layer of complexity. But we would, in a moment, we would never fully understand why a person would take an action. But what we can say is that extreme experiences lead to extreme circumstances. So what we want to do, my message is, we want to keep telling our people, be a bystander who says there are alternatives. Make that as normative as what we call the meta-narrative, the one single way of being.
All right.
You have multiple ways. You could choose other options.
I understand that. Let me interject. I understand what you're saying, especially if you're, an external element into all of this and you're seeing it play out. You need to say, listen, this is not the way. Perhaps you can talk. Let me help you get counseling, whatever. But that's not how things usually play out. One of the things you also look at is the social media use and its implications. I mean, infidelity takes place, whatever, it's discreet. Now, that's one thing. But when your entire life is playing out on social media, like some soap opera, and people are weighing in on it, and they're not weighing in to say, listen, I don't want to see that, let's try to get help for these individuals. No, this is a popcorn moment. Harry is doing something to Sally, and Sally is doing it back to Harry, and they play, and they're so bold, they ask you for part 2 and part 3. So when something like this plays out, I mean, it's harder for someone to deal with when their life is out there in the public domain.
Now, remember, social media rests in user-generated content. A person chooses to share because they're not showing off. They're seeking to make connections. The whole purpose of social media is to make connections and to articulate your networks, the people who matter to you, whether they are close or far ties. So people engage in that in the first instance to make connections with their networks, to be close to others, to connect and to have social capital, i.e. consequence in their social group, to be of significance, etc. And that is one reason. Now the consequence then is that people may not be supporting you or advising you. They just, again, having a popcorn moment. But I think the social media dynamic is not going to die an immediate death. But what might be useful is that those who are part of the close ties in that person's network, who may be observing, they are the ones who can intervene and say, hey, I observed a problem. Because remember, someone may not see something unfolding. We see it from the external. And far ties don't really care about you, right? In the same way close ties would. So I would recommend that is one angle. I would not recommend that people stop posting because the motivation for posting is to make connections to other human beings.
Even if it's negative?
Even if it's negative, even if it's crazy, even if it's misinformation, the seat of user-generated content is to connect with somebody, some other that makes you feel recognized. It is neither authentic or inauthentic, and that's a different debate. But remember, it doesn't mean, even if you put it in the background, right? If you, I don't want to get theoretical, we don't have enough time to get there.
Yeah, go ahead.
But if we were to put it in our backstage, that doesn't mean it stops happening. The same effect, the same extreme conditions can occur in the backstage and the front stage. The front stage is just that we can observe it.
But again, all of these things cannot be just simply custom made. I mean, you're talking about different individuals, different personalities. And many of us are not trained to be psychologically inclined to see some of these things. The warning signs may be there, but when you have, for example, someone who needs to have that social media presence, they need to have that attention, whether they're in some sort of skimpy outfit, they need to have that validation. And it seems as though if they're not getting it at home from their spouse or whoever, they need to get it from the general public. How do you deal with all these things taking place? Because technology is playing a role. How do you then deal with that and come about being grounded with a level of understanding?
Okay, if you are the bystander, the person who is a close tie, a friend, a family member, whatever, you have to practice empathy, non-judgmental intervention. That's very important.
Even if it gets on your nerves.
Even if it gets on your nerve, even if you think it makes no logical sense, even if you think it's bad for them and they're going down the wrong way, you have to have non-judgmental empathy. Now, that doesn't mean that you're excusing it. That doesn't mean that you're feeling sorry for them. That doesn't mean that you're taking a apathetic or even a laissez-faire approach. No, you are intervening, but you are intervening with an understanding. Let me understand what you are doing. Let me give you the respect. Let me deal with you in a way that we can reason, i.e. open a conversation rather than have somebody stonewall you, right? So you practice empathy. That's on the part of the bystander, whoever that may be. And that is both for social media or if you're walking and you see somebody doing something in the street, same thing applies. On the part of the person who is posting, we cannot predict someone's motivations, but what I would suggest is it's very important that if you are going to essentially expand your online footprint, your online profile, which lives on forever and ever and ever and never is deleted and goes everywhere, then you have to understand that you're living a public life. And if you are not ready for that, then it's advisable to avoid it because it is not a private sphere. It is a very public sphere. Now, you can be publicly private and privately public, but you have to make choices on that. So it's always important to educate yourself.
All right.
Now, when the conflict where we see death, interpersonal violence, intimate partner violence, or we see, well, as you say, honing, infidelity, which is which is let's say in the Caribbean, an old golden rule that applies, and historians will explain it in different ways, etc. I think people need to talk to each other. People need to be able to, and maybe to go back to your starting point, that's where the maturity lies. The capacity to sit and have a conversation about tough things that you're confronting, and most people are not able.
But as you know, that's not our culture, but I hope that we evolve, or are we slowly evolving to that understanding that, we need to talk, we need to communicate?
I would say some people are, but because we are, we have shame, we have blame, we have this culture about, not being a pappy show, not appearing weak, not appearing to need. Yeah. Those things are rest again back in our belief systems. Because it doesn't mean that you're weak, or it doesn't mean that you're needy, it doesn't mean if you want to have a conversation. But we put so many values onto what is normative behavior that we then curtail our capacity to resolve our problems, what we call dysfunctional conflict. And so we trigger the extreme because we're living in this state of unpeace and dysfunctional conflict that we cannot find ourselves out of it, and then we get to the extreme.
All right. Well, Doc, I want to thank you so much, Dr. Barratt. Our time is up, but we will continue, of course, part 2 of this conversation. Quite interesting. Folks are weighing in on it as well. And I want to thank you for taking time out and shedding some light on it. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, same here. You're very welcome.
Thank you so much. And that was Dr. Ann Barratt, of course, who is the head of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies at the University of West Indies, St. Augustine campus.